only philosophy or physiology, and now he makes it science. So that's why he's the father, because he does not so much for what he did as psychology, because we've kind of lost sight of that as time going by, but administratively, he makes psychology a discipline, something you can go to. And people did come from all over the world. That was the only game in town. If you wanted to study psychology, you had to go to Wundt's lab in Leipzig. And many of the first-generation psychologists in America studied with Wundt. Some of them they mention in this chapter as well, who went on to be pretty big-name people. But that was where you went, and you studied this stuff. So you don't, you came in, if you went in and said, I want to study self-esteem and gender differences, they would say, get out of here. Study flashing a light in somebody's eye, or how does it work when you measure different weights? They were really focused in on that. The other thing that he did, which is important to remember in terms of starting psychology, the first major thing is he starts a psychology department. He has a lab and students. The third thing is he also starts a journal called Philosophical Studies. He wanted to call it Psychological Studies. You think, why not do that? But somebody had already used that name for like a wacky book about spirits and ghosts and all of that. So he waited. He did eventually change it to Psychological Studies. But the first journal is called Philosophical Studies. So he did those things. That's certainly important. But the other thing in his textbook, when he wrote, he makes a very strong argument for psychology to be treated as an experimental science. Prior to this, you had all these philosophers sitting back in their chairs saying, I wonder what the mind is like, and writing their books. And of course, obviously, like Kant, they did a pretty good job, but they were not inclined to go out to see if it was true. Wundt is taken out, actually at that time in Europe and many other places as well, science was becoming a big thing. We started to kind of realize that rather than just, fall on the ground and cry and say, please don't hurt me, God, we could study something and clean something up, or eventually treat illnesses and people would be better. So science was a very popular idea, and Wundt takes it to psychology. He says, even though we're dealing with the mind, which is pretty hard to pin down, right? Remember Kant said you can't pin it down. He said study it experimentally. And in that regard, he was different than Kant. A lot of what he went on to study was pretty much in keeping with Kant, but the method was the important difference. Keep that in mind. Okay, let's see what else. When he did his psychology, there are three kinds of things that he did. One was he looked at time sense. How much time has to go between experiences before we put them together? One of the famous experiments they used to do, again, incredibly simple. Just, have somebody sit there, put their arm through a curtain so they can't see what's going on, and on the other side, one would take a little compass with two pins on the end, put them real close together, and slightly pinch the person's hand and say, what did you feel? And the person would say, a pin prick. Of course, the truth is, they felt two pins. If they're very close together, you actually feel one. Then he would move the compass point a little bit further apart, put it down. The person might say, pinprick again. I said, okay, then he does it again. And you would be interested in measuring how much distance was needed before you experienced two pinpricks, which was the truth. That's all these studies in the name of time sense. The other thing that they looked at was when you present two images quickly, and if you get them quick enough to the critical flicker frequency, I got that one out this late period of night. The two images don't appear as two images; they appear as one. So this comes back in Gestalt psychology as well, but Wundt was looking at it as well. So that's time sense. Second thing, mental chronometry. This is what he studied, and that has to do with the measurement of reaction time. He pretty much, ripping off Helmholtz, took reaction time and made it important. So that when you look at how long it takes you to solve a problem, that tells us something about how your mind is working. Nobody likes time restraints. But in this case, what he's interested in is if I do put a time restraint on you, then how do you perform, right? I mean, what if I give you the test and say you got 10 minutes to do it? All that would be important is that you probably see a different pattern of results than you would if you gave people a half hour or as much time as they wanted. So reaction time becomes very, very important. Some of the studies that they did was they used this subtractive method, a phrase you might see dance across your face in the near future. That's where you get the time that it takes to respond to a simple stimulus, then you make it more complicated, and then you subtract the complicated, from the complicated time, you subtract the simple time. And then you have an estimate of how much energy and time was required for that added complication. What he's doing here is he's playing with measurement to try to poke into to a person's head to find out what's going on. He's using reaction time. The third thing that he was concerned with was apperception. Okay, so three things: time sense, mental chronometry, and apperception. Apperception goes back to Leibniz, that moment of attention, and he called it apperception. Nowadays, we'd say studies of attention. What do we attend to? What do we notice? What determines what we pick up and what just gets blurred into background noise? So again, all of this is still, sounds pretty physiological, very experimental. It's probably not what any of you thought psychology was about, but all I'm going to say here is this is where it begins, right? So maybe you want to rethink if this is where you want to go, because this stuff, even though the names change and the story changes as time goes on, we do have our roots back in this kind of thing. And we do like experimentation. Measurement is incredibly important to psychologists even today. My daughter-in-law just called me up the other day because my granddaughter got measured on the, what was it, the Iowa something test. And she's 5 years old, but she scored like a 6.5-year-old. Does that mean she's a genius? I said, I think she's a genius. But no, I don't think that's it. And you know, it was all about test interpretation. What does it mean? How do you measure? How do you know when a kid is ready? Those are questions that are vibrant today, but it's the kind of thing that Wundt was looking at as well. Now, he was not narrow-minded once. He wrote a lot, did a lot, hang in there. He was still not so bad. He did a whole lot. And the reason I'm saying that might not be shocking to you, but for a long time, in fact, even up when I was in school, people talked about Wundt and they said, oh, he's the experimental guy doing all this crap with reaction time, who cares? And a lot of that was a result of one of his students who probably left in the middle of class right when he got to this point and went to America and told a story about Wundt and made him sound like he was nothing but an experimentalist. That's untrue. And later, as people translated his work, they discovered that Wundt had a whole other side. He did believe that a lot of important psychology could be studied experimentally by looking at physiological reactions. But he also said that we are involved with higher psychological processes that could not easily be reduced to experimental methodology. And that psychology he wrote about, and a problem that he was in particular interested in was language. He thought language was a large part of how our psychology works, and he thought we had to study it, but he wasn't sure that it could be done experimentally, so language was important. He ended up writing 10 volumes of this stuff, which that's what always surprises me. Like, back in my day, we didn't even know about it. There's 10 volumes of it. And he called it Volcker psychology. And Volk, like in Volkswagen, means people's wagon. And this is the people psychology. Another better interpretation is probably cultural psychology. He felt a lot of the things that we do in the context of culture couldn't be studied experimentally, but had to go through more of a philosophical analysis. And he did quite a lot about that. He did it when he did it. You'll read in the book that he used the stuff that he was doing in the lab to inform what he thought about culture. But he did see it as being somewhat different. Here's one interesting little bit from folk psychology. Now, in the lab, they discovered that if you took the reaction time of letters, you could do that. Because how long does it take to recognize a letter? And you could take the reaction time for 3 letters. Let's say it's 2 units. So you present a C, 2 units. An A, 2 units. A T, 2 units. Still on my mind, right? So it takes 2 units for C, A, T. Now you show somebody the word cat. What should you expect? Well, if C was 2 units, A was 2 units, and T was 2 units, you should say to read the word cat should take you 6 units altogether because you're putting them all together. No. When you read a word, you read it not much more than 2 units. And it suggests that when you're looking at words, it's not like you're simply looking at individual letters. That's the way they teach you, right? I remember teaching my daughter, it's C,